our Wednesday night class for this week. Aaron Tremblay here along again with Jim Morgan. And we are going to pick up right into chapter 42. If you're able to be with us last week, we got a little bit farther, but we thought a great verse to kind of kick off from again this week would be verse 18, because it carries several key pieces for us to understand the rest of the narrative as we move forward. I'll just repeat real quickly that we would love for you to send us questions if you have them. I'll put the link up again in the video. Appreciate the comments. We've been getting some comments
we have.
In response to the video. Appreciate those. We have gotten some questions, and hopefully we've done a good job of answering those. So again, if you have questions or comments you'd like to make, please take time to send an email to the link that's provided.
But and if I could provide, I'd like to squash one rumor right now. It will not take us as long to cover the life of Joseph as Joseph actually lived. We just believe that it's worth the time to do this. Take the time to do this.
Absolutely. So let's jump into verse 18. It says, on the third day, let's remember that Joseph, in the preceding verses, he sent his brothers into prison to spend 3 days there. So that's what this is referencing. On the third day that they were in prison, Joseph calls them out. And he said to them, do this and you will live. That phrase, the memory that jumps out to me when he uses that phrase, do this and you will live, is the quote from Luke chapter 10, when Jesus asks about what are the two greatest commandments, and the guy actually gets it right, and Jesus says, oh, you're right, do this and live. But then, who's my neighbor, right, is the next thing that comes up. But a good statement, do this and you will live, for I fear God. And that statement's really pivotal and important. It's the first time God gets brought up. His brothers honestly should have been the ones to bring up God at some point, but now it's this foreign dignitary is the one who brings up God. And honestly, you go back in Genesis, there's not a whole lot of trust between Abraham and foreign people when they reference God. And the patriarchal period, that's usually not indicative of a good thing when someone else starts claiming that they fear God.
The only other one I can think of where it really, that's the way it is Melchizedek.
Yeah,
he and Abraham get along real well. But there's no question Melchizedek serves God.
Absolutely. And Joseph is going to go on to demonstrate this, because one of the things we read about in the Old Testament, that people who fear God, one of the things they do is they feed the hungry. They help those who are less fortunate, right? And that's what he's about to do. And his brothers really can't say they fear God at this point, because as we talked about last week, they commit genocide, they have incest with their father's concubine, they sell Joseph off, Judah impregnates his daughter-in-law. So they couldn't really say, oh, we fear God, because the proof's in the pudding and the pudding's not there.
Yeah, they put the dis in dysfunctional.
That's right. But Joseph does fear God. So here's what he says in 19. If you're honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry the grain for the famine of your households. So here's what I want to mention about 19. Joseph does not say that whoever you leave is my invited, honored guest to stay in, the other master bedroom in my house and have all the pleasures of, okay? This is going to be important later because of how they relay this to their father. He says, you can leave one and he's going to stay right in prison where you were, okay? But you can go and carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. So again, let me highlight this because it's going to come up later. Joseph doesn't say, and if you bring me your brother, oh, you can have free trade here, you can have all these great blessings. No, he says, if you don't bring me your brother, there's going to be executions.
Yeah.
Okay?
People will die.
The people are going to die. Yeah, and if no one else dies, the brother you leave here, you can at least kiss him goodbye if you don't come back, right? So again, they're gonna polish that up a little bit when they tell Dad about it. But Joseph's actual words were, "There's going to be death if you don't do what I tell you." Anything else stick out to you in those first couple of verses?
Now that's bringing us to the story at this point.
Pick up in 21 if you want.
Okay. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen, and that's why this distress has come upon us. So the idea here, we're starting with some serious guilt.
Oh,
because this has been years. This has been over a decade. And as soon as anything bad happens, they immediately suspect this is because of what we did to Joseph.
It's almost like they've been waiting for something bad to happen.
Yeah.
Like they maybe feel like they've gotten away with it, but as soon as the first bad thing that happens, oh, we deserve this. We earned this. Let me mention a couple things about that verse. The guilt is the important piece, okay? They're finally starting to feel some, even though clearly they've had this in the back of their mind since they did it all those years ago. But a couple things I think worth highlighting. They say the distress of his soul. Okay, so, I mean, we're talking about not an easy situation here.
Yeah.
Joseph didn't say, oh, it's going to work out. Let me just jump in with these guys and get sold into slavery.
Yeah, I'll see y'all later.
His distress went right to
screaming, crying, tears.
All of it. Because the very next thing it says,
being dragged away.
Yours has pleaded. Is that what yours has in the NIV?
Yeah, when he pleaded with us for his life.
And mine has, he begged us, and we did not listen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we were talking about this actually a little bit last week, but we never got to it. But we don't use this word pleaded very often. There's not many things.
Usually it's a legal term.
Yeah, a plea bargain, or you plead guilty or not guilty. Yeah. But pleading is, I mean, begging kind of conveys it a little bit, but a couple of other usages of this word in the Old Testament. There's one in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 23, where Moses is talking to God. God is telling Moses, you will not see the promised land. And Moses begs or pleads with God for God to let him see the promised land. And when you think about how bad Moses must have wanted to go to the promised land. I mean, he's going to lead these people.
Oh, yeah.
And this is going to be the culmination of his life, is to get to this promised land. And God says, you're not going. I mean, he must have gone on his hands and knees. He promised never to, do anything bad ever again. That whole situation, I'll never be bad again if you just don't do that, And it gets to the point, actually, where God, a few verses later on, I think it's in 26 or 28, God says, enough. No more pleading and begging. This is how it's going. I don't want to hear anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I think that just helps us to understand. It's not just that Joseph was like, oh, please. No, I mean, he was begging literally for his life. He's distressed to his soul. I mean, he's pouring himself out to his brothers here, and they hit the nail right on the head when it says, and we just didn't listen.
Yeah, and NIV has a little bit different there. It says, we would not listen.
Would not listen.
Which puts it back into their court. It's not just that we didn't listen, it's we wouldn't listen.
Yeah, even though
we just refused to do it.
Even though he pleaded and he bore his soul to us. And I like how they connect the whole thing back to themselves. We saw the distress of his soul, and now we have distress coming on our soul. So this thing has come full circle, and we deserved it. And even though they didn't necessarily have the concept of the law, we do have some things earlier on in Genesis that talk about, for instance, when God's talking to Noah in Genesis chapter 9, and he says, if a man gets blood on his hands, takes another man's life by blood, then his life will be demanded from him in blood, for I have made man in my image. So there are some principles in terms of blood guilt and those kind of things already in existence here.
Yeah, that's going to be in verse 22. We must give an accounting for his blood.
That's right. So we got several crucial truths here in 21. Finally, some guilt fell. Finally, we get to hear what Joseph's response was when his brothers sell him into slavery. It was not eager acceptance. It was complete resistance and distress. And we also make the connection that his brothers see it now coming full circle. What they did was so bad, they've just been waiting for the hammer to fall concerning it.
And even though Joseph, knows now why he's down here, he doesn't say, hey guys, it's me, don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. No, there's a price that has to be paid. And I think that's what they say, that's why we've been punished. There's a price that has to be paid.
I would make a connection too to Acts 2 when they're cut to the heart. That kind of idea, right? That the guilt finally becomes a realization to them that we did this. We have committed this crime. We took this life. Yeah. So what should we do now? That's the same thing they're asking. Now we're in this mess and the distress is on us. Now what do we do?
Yeah. And one thing I think is interesting is verse 22. It says, Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? Now it's interesting he brings that as sin in here. Mm-hmm. It's not just, we made a bad decision. It's sin. Mm-hmm. But you wouldn't listen. well, this is all their fault.
That seems to be kind of a theme, right?
We're kicking it around here. Now we must give an accounting for his blood.
Mm-hmm.
And you wonder, how does Simeon feel about all this standing there listening?
Yeah.
Like his brothers are just giving him up. You know, well, okay, you know, we have to pay, you know, somebody's going to have to pay for it. Simeon, you're staying here.
Well, and as we move on in the story, it seems like Joseph is really the one who picks Simeon, because it just says that he took Simeon.
Yeah.
Maybe he would have taken Reuben as the firstborn, except now this is the first time Joseph gets to hear about how all this went down. I mean, were they all on board? Did everyone think that this is the way they should go? Was this the plan from the beginning? Well, now he learns Reuben, at least, was not on board with this plan.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't stop it. He didn't actually stop it.
Yeah.
And he didn't undo it. He didn't try and chase Joseph down or tell his dad what really happened.
Yeah.
But he at least
As I
wasn't
recall,
quite
was
as
it Reuben
guilty.
the one who came back and was going to, after the others were at dark, he came back and was going to get him out of the pit?
Yes.
And there's nobody in the pit.
He was gone. Yes.
And then he goes and says, okay, geniuses, what are you going to tell Daddy?
And let's notice the theme here, them not listening.
Mhm.
They have not been listening to their conscience, if they even had one, for quite some time now. That's been how they've been living, but finally some of these things are coming home to roost.
Yeah.
And Reuben is holding their feet to the fire and saying, didn't I tell you? Didn't I say? And it reminds me so many times of when God has to come along to his people and say, didn't I tell you?
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't that start from the very beginning in Genesis?
Yeah.
Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say don't eat that stuff? And I told you there's going to be a consequence. Now there's a consequence.
And then Adam said, you know that woman you gave me?
Right, and they try and pass the blame.
Always try to blame.
Isn't that what happens here too? Reuben's like, hey, this is you guys' fault. I tried to tell you don't.
You wouldn't listen.
Right.
Now we have to give an accounting for his blood, so it's not my fault. And point you made, they did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter, and he turned away from them and began to weep, but then turned back and spoke to them again, and he had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Mm-hmm. So I think you're exactly right. Joseph had no idea what happened afterwards.
Yes.
The only thing he knows is nobody ever came to get him. And now he's beginning to realize a little bit more of the full story.
Yeah, that there was contention even among his brothers in the midst of it.
But on the other hand, nobody did anything.
So
no matter what your good intentions were, you guys didn't do a thing.
Nobody did the right thing.
Yeah.
So they acknowledge at the very end of 22, this is a blood guilt that's there. Yeah. So if we're truly guilty, then our life, the consequence of this goes as far as all of us could lose our life over this. That's the weight of what they're dealing with.
Yeah. Because that's the way they've lived their life. Anytime something bad happened, they were there to make sure the vengeance was taken.
That's right, to fix it.
Guilt, we're gonna extract it. And you remember, with the story with Dinah, it wasn't just that one guy, since he was the one who had sinned,
perpetrated it.
They go and just wipe out the entire
men, women,
village.
Children, everyone's affected
blood
by it.
guilt.
And,
so the problem is that's the way they would handle it, and therefore they assume that everybody else would handle it that way too.
And you're exactly right. We get to 24 and we see, or 23, and we see kind of a deception there. Joseph doesn't need an interpreter, surely, but he's utilizing one. Mm-hmm. So they don't recognize. He gets to hear the honest heart of the issue between his brothers, wrestling this thing out. And you see the weight of that on Joseph to hear it, and then he turns away and weeps. And this weeping is key, just like, it's maybe the smallest verse in the Bible and the one we all hope got asked at the Bible Bowl to recite. John 11:35, Jesus wept.
Jesus wept.
But it's pivotal in that story. It's key to understanding kind of where Jesus is at in that story. And this idea of weeping is utilized in the same way to take us through the rest of Joseph's narrative, because he weeps here as he's initially reunited with his brothers. He's going to weep again when he first meets Benjamin. Then he weeps again when he hears one of his brothers willing to give up their life for Benjamin's life. That causes him to weep, and we understand why. Yeah. They've really changed now.
These guys have changed.
And then he weeps again when he finally meets his father. So it becomes a marker for these key moments as we move throughout the rest of the narrative.
And it's interesting, one of the things that he's going to discover later is how much his brothers have changed. That they still don't like Daddy.
Yeah.
But they don't want to see him, they don't want to see this killing. Mm-hmm. And so they say, we cannot go back and bring our dad down to the grave, just keep us all in slavery here, but let Benjamin go.
Just let him go.
So that's a real definition of love, is when you treat people you don't even like the way that you would want to be treated. And so I think that's just an indication. And again, we talked about this last week. The idea of this whole story is, can people change? Well, how much?
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's how much they can change.
And it's Judah that offers his life
Yeah.
up. The one who impregnated his daughter. He's just walking down the street and picks a car. Hey, I'm going to sleep with you tonight. And
Mhm.
that's how he was living his life before. And now he's like, I'll give my life for my brother.
Yeah, and his reaction when, you know, his sister-in-law ends up pregnant, he said, we're going to stone her to death because somebody has really got to pay for this.
Yeah.
And then when she says, it was the guy who owns this and this, he says, she's more righteous than I am. So
we can find a little room for grace.
yeah.
Yeah.
When it's us, we always do.
Sure. But you just look at that contrast between who Judah was, and now he's at the point that I'm assuming there was, we're not told really explicitly in the text, but I'm assuming there was animosity between the brothers and Benjamin, just based on how much animosity there was between them and Joseph. And Jacob must have intensified his protectiveness of Benjamin after losing Joseph, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Judah's offering up his life not just for Simeon or for Reuben, but he's offering up his life for Benjamin. Of all the brothers you would think he'd give his life for, not Benjamin, you know? And I think that's what brings Joseph to tears, is that recognition of the change of heart that's taking place.
And remember, Joseph has given them every reason to be able to go back and tell their daddy, Benjamin got what he deserved. The kid stole the guy's cup.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So, and Joseph tells them, no, he'll pay for his crimes, but y'all just go ahead. You're innocent.
Mm.
They could have walked away and not even felt guilty about it.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, they just all turn back and go back and say, no, take us, but please let him go home. And when you look at the story, remember Moses is talking to the children of the people who came out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And when the tribe of Judah, when Judah came out of Egypt, they were bad people.
Oh, man.
They never learned anything. Now you've got their children, Judah, and Judah has changed, and God will accept it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key to this whole thing is Judah can change, and Judah can change.
But the key that we see between the changing is the acceptance of the guilt, right?
Mm-hmm.
You won't change until you accept that what you've done is wrong. And that's where we see his brothers at. Now they're finally ready to acknowledge, we heard the distress of his soul, we heard those things, but now it's coming back to cost us something. Now we're willing to consider changing. Mm-hmm. And if that's not the definition of what God's people do in the Old Testament, once it starts to cost them something, they're like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have been doing that. But they're content in it without acknowledging the guilt until it costs them something.
Yeah, and remember at this point, it's still all just words.
Right, true.
Nobody's done anything yet.
But an expression at least of heart, right?
Yeah.
We did something wrong. We did this, and we're getting what we deserve, seems to be the sense. You know, we gave him distress, now we're getting distress. We got blood on our hands, now we're blood guilty. You know, so a sense.
Much as I hate to quote Waylon Jennings, what goes around comes around.
What goes around comes around, exactly. So Joseph weeps, and he takes Simeon from them and bounds him before their eyes. I have a few thoughts on why he picked Simeon, but I think they're just pure speculations. I'll probably just keep them to myself. He was the second son of Leah, and Joseph is asking for the second son of Rachel, and a few other thoughts. Simeon was pretty bloody and all those things, but I think the point is they have to leave a brother behind ultimately. 25, Joseph gave orders to fill the bags with grain, and this is key here in the story, and to replace every man's money in his sack, and to give provisions for the journey, and this was done for them. Now, he doesn't tell them he's putting the money back in the sack, but he commands that it be put back in the sack. So when their animals are brought, when their donkeys are brought back to them, all they know is that they're full of grain. Mm-hmm. And I guess they're assuming the money sacks are full of grain too. That must have been their assumption.
Yeah, and again, you know, this is just all part of my theory that this is the plan, because now they got every reason in the world not to come back.
That's right.
You know, okay, not the guy's already thinking we're spies, and he doesn't even know us. Now we've been there for 3 days, and now he thinks we're thieves. And so they got every reason in the world not to go back down there, because if he did this to us when he has no proof, man, we got all of this silver in our sacks.
Yeah, enough silver to buy enough grain to get them through the famine.
Yeah.
We're not talking about $10. And they've already shown they're willing to sell one of their brothers for 30 pieces of silver. So now they got bags of silver.
Well, and plus, it would be worth their lives.
Correct. and they don't have to go
So
back
what
and
would
get
they
thrown
give
in
for their
prison again.
lives? You know, okay, we'll give a brother, and all he got us was 20 pieces of silver, whatever. And now, if we go back down there, man, this lot will cost us our lives.
Mhm.
And if we don't bring Benjamin with us, it will definitely cost us our lives.
Exactly.
So there's every reason in the world
Not
not
to
to
come
go
back.
back.
And that's the test that Joseph is
Yeah.
giving them.
Have you really changed?
You
Or
say
still,
you've
or are you
changed,
still
but
the
have
same
you?
guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's where you have now opportunity
Yeah.
to show actual repentance or
Mhm.
change. So 26 says, then they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed. And as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money in the mouth of the sack. And he said to his brothers, my money has been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack. At this, their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? So they're just going down the road. They're like, we dodged a bullet. They're probably talking about they're probably practicing their story. They're going to tell Dad, how are we going to convince Dad to let Benjamin come back with us? And they get to their lodging place, and all right, I got to feed the donkey so he can keep carrying this stuff. And he sees in his bag that all the money is there. What does the NIV have? Mine has, and their hearts failed them.
Sank.
And literally, it's went out from them.
Yeah.
Is what the literal meaning is there. And it's the only time that phrase is used in the Bible. That just, man, their hearts sank. I mean,
Well, if you've ever had an experience where all of a sudden you just realize something is really bad, and that feeling in your chest, where, ugh, it really does feel like it stinks.
yeah.
And that's what they've got.
And I mean, the full weight of this thing is, I mean, it was bad enough as it was, but hey, we got food to bring back to Dad. Let's figure this thing out. But they know that guy was thinking they're spies, and now they stole this money.
Yeah. I think 28's interesting. He says, my silver's been returned.
Yeah.
Hey, they just gave it back to me. No, that's not the way they're going to see it.
Right, exactly. And so they turned trembling to one another. So, went to prison.
What is this that God has done to us?
Yeah, they went to prison, they weren't trembling. Now they're trembling. And I think that's the difference. Because now they say, hey, this is a godly, there's something else going on here besides just some guy messing with us.
Yeah.
God's involved in this, and they're seeing themselves deserving of death with this guilt and distress and all these things. And now they see this idea of God's hand is involved in this thing. And this is serious. It's kind of like a whole nother level of fear that they're filled with.
Yeah.
And fear is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean,
No.
it seems like a pretty biblical principle, having a godly fear, fear of
Yeah.
God. Paul certainly seems it that way in terms of the sorrow that it brings about. In 2 Corinthians 7, when he talks about that idea, godly sorrow brings about repentance, but worldly sorrow brings about death.
Yeah.
And so they're having some remorse and they're having some sorrow, and now they see God in this thing.
Yeah.
And so that changes their attitude, their perspective.
They could at least feel like, we know we're not spies. And we're not thieves, but man, how in the world would we ever prove it?
How can you convince someone that you didn't fill your own sack with
Yeah.
No, somebody else gave me all this
He
money.
already doesn't like us.
Nobody's going to believe their story, which interestingly
No.
enough, even their own dad doesn't, I don't think,
No.
buy the thing, oh yeah, I just gave you your money. I'm sure that's what happened, So here we are. I mean, they have some guilt in the first section. Now they are filled with a fear, and not just any fear, but a fear of God. And now, having all of that happen, they come to their dad's, back to their dad's house. You want to pick up in 29?
Yeah. When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. And they said, the man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, we are honest men. We are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan. And then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, this is how I'll know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, take food for your starving households, and go. But bring your youngest brother to me so that I will know that you are not spies but honest men, and then I'll give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land.
So we got to take a minute to analyze this speech
Yeah.
that they give to Dad, okay? Because it says they told him all that had happened to them. Not quite.
Not quite.
They seem to be missing we were in jail for 3 days. That doesn't seem to be in there.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be missing that he threatened to kill them. That doesn't seem to make it into the story. And the most recent event that Scripture gives us seems to be skipped, which is we found money in the sacks that shouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
So they skipped 3 pretty huge things in this story, all of which would have been probably the most terrifying things to their dad, right? We were in jail. What do you mean you were in jail for 3 days? That would have been a scary thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
He told us he's going to kill us. That's not going to encourage Dad to give us Benjamin to go back.
No, that.
And the money in the sacks, as we're going to find out a little bit later, it terrifies Dad too. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
terrifies all of them. It changes the whole scenario. It steps things up a notch. So they selectively recall or recount the story to their dad.
Well, they learned it from Dad.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure enough.
Everything that's happening, you go back in the life of Jacob, and it's there.
Mm-hmm.
They come by this honest, if you will.
We are
but,
honest.
You know, they have looked at what Dad is doing. Dad is so proud of it. Did I ever tell you about the time I fooled my brother? Let me tell you about that. And it just, what goes around does come around.
Absolutely.
And the wonder is that they even love their father at all. But somewhere along the line, they felt so sorry for what they'd done to him that they kept on loving him out of guilt, I guess.
I mean, he was you talk about distress of the soul.
Yeah.
Jacob was distressed about losing Joseph.
But you know, there's one other thing that I just noticed here in this story is the next verse, but apparently nobody else went out and checked their silver.
No.
Nobody checked their sacks to see if all of it, well, you got your silver back.
Well, I think that I was reading several different kind of commentaries or thoughts on it, and you know, the idea that maybe they waited until Dad was there so they don't actually have to tell him. They can just let him kind of see, oh, look, there's money in my sack too, you know, instead of everyone just saying they found money.
Yeah.
Let Dad see us, that surprise on our face too.
Yeah, and that's what it says there in verse 35.
Yeah.
As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver, and when they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened.
Yeah, that goes right back to that being just as terrified as finding one. Now they find a whole bunch of them.
Yeah. You could maybe explain how one person's money got overlooked.
Right.
But everybody's
bags, come on. And even Dad's not buying that.
No, he's not
line of
buying it at
goods.
all.
But going back to their recounting, they even the order of their story is wrong. They say we told them we're honest men, and then we told them that we're brothers. It's actually backwards. If you remember, they first told them we're all sons of one man, and we are honest men. They seem to be trying to do everything that they can with the way, like the timing of things and what actually happened. They're trying to soften this up as much as they possibly can for Dad. And even to the point that, like we talked about earlier, I said it was going to be important here in 34, I'll deliver your brother to you and you can trade in the land. Very positive, a promise that Joseph actually never made. But they put it in the light of a promise. Hey, think about this good thing we'll get if we do this, instead of, I'm going to start killing people if you don't do what I said.
Well, they knew Dad's weakness.
Yeah. Talk about
they knew, you know, if there's anything that's going to get Benjamin down there, it's because Dad thinks there's something in it for him.
Financial.
And that's exactly the way it works out, because it's only when Jacob gets hungry that he says, okay, take Benjamin and go back and get me some food.
That's right. So they're working it a little bit here. They're for guys who are now reiterating the fact that they said we're honest men.
Yeah.
Are literally, as those words are coming out of their mouth, lying. So I just think that's convenient, I guess. And then also, by the way, where they said, you know, we left our brother with him, as if, you know, he asked us to leave him there and put him up in his guest house or something.
Yeah.
So you got to 35.
Yeah, and he didn't buy it because verse 36.
Exactly. They all find that this money is there, and they weren't expecting it. And Jacob, their father, said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. All this has come against me. So Jacob sees Simeon's fate as equal to Joseph's. And I think the way that Jacob sees Joseph's fate is, I don't really know what happened. I just know he's not. He is no more.
He is no more.
He's not here. I'm not believing what you're telling me about this thing that happened and all. He's not buying all that. In his mind, all I know is he's no more. You know, it's as if, you know, somebody went missing and you never really know what happened. Some people might tell you, well, maybe it was a homicide, but you don't really know. They're just not here. That's what I know. They're no more. And Simeon, it's interesting to me that he treats him exactly the same way. He doesn't say, and Simeon's being put up in Pharaoh's guest house until you go back with Benjamin. He doesn't say, and Simeon's sitting in a jail cell. He says, and Simeon is no more. So in other words, I'm not buying what you're selling me. The only thing I know that I can accept is he's not here. He's no more. That's all I know. And you have bereaved me yet again, and now you want me to let you take Benjamin so that Benjamin can become no more. Mm-hmm. And he gives them, puts all the guilt really where it belongs, and says, you have done this to me. This is your fault. You are doing this. So not a lot of room for confusion there in terms of where Jacob's at.
Jacob's exactly where he is always, and that's with Jacob.
And I think Reuben's response, and I'll let you read that in a second, but I think where Reuben goes with this enlightens us a little bit too in terms of Jacob's stance towards his sons. His sons are all like, whoa, look at this money that we just found. We didn't know this was here. Jacob says, all right, that's it. Joseph's no more. Now Simeon's no more. This money just magically shows up. In other words, I don't believe you guys. I don't believe what you're telling me. You say you're honest men, but you're not. I think Reuben's drastic response to what Jacob is saying is a crazy attempt to try and get some semblance of belief or trust.
They know their audience.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting, but it says they opened the sacks and they were frightened. Mm-hmm. Well, the brothers were frightened because they know now what's going to happen to them if they ever go back down to Egypt again. And Jacob is frightened because he's afraid he's going to lose his only favored son, Benjamin.
And this is truly where it's would be most convenient for them to say, you know what, we're not going back, right? Because Dad's already
send the girls.
Dad already believes that Simeon's no more anyway.
Yeah.
He doesn't think he's in jail. He just says he's no more. Well, let's let him be no more. We got tons of money. We got tons of food. We got everything we need. There's no reason to go. The only reason they have right now to go back is to get Simeon.
Mm-hmm. And later on in the story, this we won't get that to this week, but the next time he refers to Simeon, he can't even remember his name. He says, maybe your other brother and Benjamin can come back.
Yeah.
So, again, this man is not getting many votes for father of the year.
Jacob has kind of his own motif in this whole story.
Oh, yeah.
But the brothers are the ones being tested. And I think this testifies that Reuben makes this statement that they're still willing to go back. That Jacob says he's no more. Jacob's accepted he's never going to see Simeon again. Period. And this is... So they don't even have to worry about their dad. He's not going to get more mad at him. Simeon's not going to be more gone. So this is their chance to say, you know what, you're right, we're sorry, we're not going to risk Benjamin, we'll all stay here and count our money instead. But as opposed to that, verse 37 comes along, if you want to pick up with that.
Then Reuben said to his father, you may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back. Now, as a grandfather, I cannot imagine this.
How is this going to work out for me?
Yeah, I mean,
I either lose my son or two of my grandkids.
Yeah, well, the idea that he actually thinks you would put two of your grandchildren to death in order to get revenge on me, wouldn't you? I cannot imagine anything that would cause. I have a hard enough time punishing my kids by telling our grandkids, you can't do that. I cannot imagine what would produce this kind of a response. He says, verse 38, but Jacob said, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. And you were the one who I think pointed out before we started filming that this is where he admits Joseph is not just no more, not just missing, he's dead.
He's dead, yeah. And this is where Jacob is now cutting off all of the brothers except Benjamin.
He is the only one left.
He does it in two ways. He says, my son shall not go, for his brother is dead. So, in other words, my son and his brother. There's two. And then he goes on from there and says, as if to emphasize that fact, there's only one son left, and his name's Benjamin. Not Reuben, not Simeon, and so on and so forth. I have one left. He's all I got. And so he's not willing to sacrifice. And when he talks about Joseph being gone in the earlier chapters, it talks about his hair becoming gray with sorrow and all that. Well, this is a whole nother level. Not just that his hair becomes gray, but I'm going to die. This will kill me if he goes with you. And so, I mean...
Which you have to remember, he can say that, but later on he's going to let him go.
Correct. Because he gets hungry.
Because he gets hungry.
Because hunger does
It's
a lot of things to
all
people.
about Jacob.
Yeah.
Always. From the very beginning, it's always been about
And his sons pick up on that because
Yeah.
they're all selfish and do what's in their best interest for themselves. You even,
apples and falling from the tree.
right, exactly. But they're in this process, and I think they're pretty well into the process of they accept the guilt, they accept the responsibility. It goes from just feeling guilty. Guilt in and of itself is not going to do anything for you.
Mm.
Fear in and of itself is not going to do anything for you.
It's all words.
It's that fear leading to change, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where we're now seeing manifested that change. And again, they don't just see it as a fear of Joseph. Going back to, what was that, 28, where it says God has done this. It's a fear of
Mhm.
God. Not a fear of Dad, not a fear of Joseph. Now we're talking about a fear of God. That's where
Yeah.
some change can start to come in.
We can put things past Daddy.
Mhm.
And we can even fool the guy in Egypt. We can't put anything past God.
That's right. And I think again, going back to Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 7 and verse 11, he lists off all these things. He talks about godly sorrow brings to repentance, worldly sorrow leads to death. But then he talks about, in you I see earnestness. Well, because they have godly sorrow. Well, these guys seem like all of a sudden they've gone from being dishonest, well, to a certain extent anyway, to being earnest. Paul talks about eagerness to clear yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty eager to clear themselves at this
Yeah.
point. Now, they can't tell their dad the truth about the situation because then they have to admit to all their crimes, but they're certainly eager to clear themselves. Reuben to the point, I'll sacrifice my own sons. I want to be
Yeah.
clear of this thing. Paul talks about indignation, alarm, longing, concern, readiness to see justice done.
And
That's
be
what the
sure your
brothers are.
sins will find you out.
That's right. So they have indignation now, right? They have
Yeah.
indignation with themselves. They have alarm. They're all
Of
terrified.
course, when you've got your
fear.
money and you got all of these sacks of grain, it's kind of easy to be indignant.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all going away.
But they have longing and concern too, right? They
Yeah.
have concern for Benjamin. They have concern for their father and the fact that he's going to die. It's revealed to us in a little
Mhm.
bit more of a way in 43. But they're filled with these things, and interestingly enough, they're ready for the idea of justice. I think because they're expecting Joseph to be faithful to his word,
Yeah.
or they wouldn't even do this, right? If they thought
He
Joseph
said,
was
I
lying,
fear God.
right? But they're expecting justice. This is what he said, and this is what he's going to do. We expect him to keep to his word, So I just think it's interesting. All those things that Paul talks about with worldly sorrow and godly sorrow. It's not just writing; it's truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we see it happening to Joseph's brothers as we go through this chapter.
And, as preachers, we have both had people come in and they're convinced everything's happened to me is because of I did this. And I thought I had hidden it and now God's punishing me. And that's not always necessarily true. But it is a powerful guilt
Mm-hmm.
when you think you deserve something. That's much worse than, why is all this happening to me? I'm innocent.
Mm-hmm.
That was Joseph. I have not done anything to deserve being
And Job
here.
and
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, but in this story.
Sure, yeah.
The one who has suffered up to this point is the one who hasn't done anything to deserve
Correct.
this. That's what he
Correct.
says.
Yeah.
And now the ones who actually deserve to suffer, they're finally getting it. But Joseph has left them a way out. And again, I think that's the key part. They don't have to go back. Because he's made it clear, if you don't bring Benjamin back, you don't come back.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think we're about out of time.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. 42 is a big chapter.
Oh,
There's
it's
a lot going
huge.
on there.
It's
and,
huge.
And it's all about now, we've kind of transitioned from just a focus on Joseph getting through these pivotal years to be raised to the place where God can now use him to save not only his family but the world. That's what the text talks about. We've moved from that individual focus on Joseph to now expanding that view out from just the one who has come or been raised to a certain place to save the world to now how is that directly impacting those who are closest to him, and then we'll get to kind of the whole world. How did it impact all the future and how everything would unfold?
Yeah. And God doesn't bless Joseph just for Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
God blesses Joseph and he expects those blessings to be shared.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same way it is with us today. Whatever God has blessed us with, we're supposed to use that to bring the glory of God.
Absolutely.